Is it Castellow? Castellow? All right.
Basically, friends moved in November of 2016. Okay, I welcomed to the neighborhood, said hope everything goes well, but then as of December of 2016, I myself was having family issues, this and everything. I was in and out of the house a lot. I had to come home and take care of my dog, taking my dog out, and Gadsby, the friend's dog, was pretty much on my property, sort of disturbing me, so that I had to basically take my dog somewhere else. Okay, I'm trying to make this short because this is history. Okay, the first time I confronted Mr. Friends was in January of 2017, which is pretty much 2 months after they moved in. And I said, your dog's basically on our property, it's sort of bothering my dog, etc. At that point in time, I thought everything would be fine. The neighborly thing to do was, okay, he obviously does not like, my dog on his property, so I will take care of it. And I thought it was taken care of at that point in time. But over the years, as time went on, Gadsby would still come on over. He'd be running across our yard, and a lot of these I didn't witness, but there was excrement in the yard. I did not witness those. I don't know that it came from him, so I can't testify to that, but it was always in front of my wood pile or pretty much on the side of my yard. Okay, cameras went up. So I finally put cameras up because I'm not going to accuse them if I don't know who's doing it. So I finally put pictures up, or cameras up, and I have pictures worth of, 1,000 words, so there's 10,000 words right here, completely. So, at times he was running up on our deck. We had friends over sometimes. We're eating crabs, and one person was afraid of dogs, and of course that didn't add to the fun of the day either. I didn't put that in there anyway. I'm just giving a little bit of history. So right now I've confronted Mr. Friends. I don't even know how many times I can count. It's just gone on. I thought it would stop, and it just never stops. The confrontations are getting hostile. I'm to the point. I just can't take it anymore, and the buttons have been pushed too many times. So that's when I finally I finally submitted these things, starting with August 4th, I believe is the first one I submitted. And I just want it to stop. I just want the dog off my property. If you look in these pictures that are going around, they're not in sight anywhere. The friends are nowhere in sight. They are in not control of Gadsby whatsoever in any of these pictures whatsoever. So they probably don't even recall when this happened. So I'm just to the point right now. Where were they when these pictures were taken? Were they anywhere around? No, they weren't. So I don't know what else to say. I mean, a picture's 1,000 words. I just want it to stop. That's all I want. I just want it to stop.
Does your wife want to say anything?
I'll pass for right now. Thank you.
Hi. Thank you very much for your time. I actually have a statement that I would like to read, if that is okay with the commission. I have copies. And appended here too is a notarized statement from a third party, neutral party, who was present for one of the altercations. Thank you.
Before you leave.
Yes.
No problem.
And I-
Getting is just what you're about to do.
Yes, ma'am. And this is the true form of the notarization, which is raised. I also have a character witness here that can answer any questions, who is a former neighbor. I have Charlene Meckling, if you have any questions for her as well. So thank you for your time and allowing for us to share with you our side of the story and our perspective on this issue. As I'm sure you're aware, there are always two sides to every story. And I'm assuming that this, like many other similar cases, is more of a people problem than an animal problem. First and foremost, our dog's name is Gatsby with a T. If you would be so kind as to look up his record, you will see that we have consistently registered him, ensured that his vaccinations are up to date, and have paid to the county all associated fees. Despite Mr. Castellow's assertions, we are very responsible pet owners and treat our dog like a furry son. He has never been boarded in his 8.5 years and has never spent a night without being with a family member who ensures his safety and loves him at all times. Regarding the matter at hand, and as a brief background, we actually moved to Edgewater in December of 2016. Part of our choosing our current neighborhood was the natural wooded surroundings and plenty of room for Gatsby and our daughter to play. Aside from property boundaries, our particular property is bordered on 3 to 4 sides by common space that is not owned by any single owner. This is actually our home here that comes off the long driveway. This is the Castellow's home. And on all 3 sides of our property is wooded acreage that is common space. It is not owned by any particular one resident of the association.
I like to understand myself.
In his statement, Mr. Castellow references that we have had prior issues with animal control. Please let me be clear that there was one prior issue with animal control. At our prior residence, we installed an electric dog fence around the perimeter of our property as Gatsby was still a puppy. We actually got him when he was only 8 weeks old. The neighborhood was dangerous for a number of reasons. We had a particularly problematic neighbor, but including that fact, our front yard actually bordered a busy street. So in an attempt to keep Gatsby contained and keep him safe, we did put in that electric dog fence. A neighbor actually complained to animal control that Gatsby was barking as his nephew was running the length of our front yard when the teenager passed by. Gatsby only reacted this way when it was this young man. We quickly discovered that the reason for Gatsby's reaction was because the young man was throwing things at Gatsby, including snowballs and rocks. Even with things being hurled at him, Gatsby did not break through his electric fence, so clearly it worked, but unfortunately it worked too well, as Gatsby was petrified to leave the property, even when we made it clear that his electric fence collar had been removed. Whenever we needed him to leave the property, whether it was for a vet visit or as banal as a daily walk, we had to put him in the back of our car, back out of our driveway, park on the street, and get him out of the car. The reverse would have to happen when we returned to the property to get him back onto the property because he would not cross that line. The idea of having him live on a property surrounded by wooded acreage where he could be safe was nothing short of spectacularly welcoming. Due to the emotional and physical trauma that resulted from the prior electric fence, we have been, and in certain respects continue to be, unwilling to install another fence at our current house. Gatsby is no longer a puppy. Again, I said he was 8.5 years old. He had months of training when he was younger, and he is an intelligent dog. Unfortunately, at the end of the day, he is a dog. He is unable to distinguish where our property ends, where the common space begins, where the common space ends, and where the Castellow property begins. Making this even more difficult is the fact that Gatsby was welcomed onto the Castellow property by Mrs. Castellow. Within a short time of our moving to our current residence, I met Anne in our yard as her dog Bella came into our yard upon seeing Gatsby. I spoke with Mrs. Castellow for a short time, and when another dog came into my yard as well, I called that owner using the dog's tags just so that she knew where her dog was. I told her, the other neighbor, as well as Mrs. Castellow, that their dogs were welcome in our yard to play with Gatsby at any time. Thereafter, Mrs. Castellow often invited Gatsby to her yard and gave him dog treats off of her balcony, the same balcony that you see in many of the photos that Mr. Castellow submitted with his citations and complaints. It is therefore not surprising that Gatsby thought he was welcome on the Castellow's property and quite frankly was rewarded with treats when he went there. Clearly at some point, however, his presence became unwelcome, and Mr. Castellow took an opposite approach than that of his wife. Despite his claims that his interactions with us began in January 2017, the first time he spoke with either of us, but precisely that date with my husband, about Gatsby was on June 15, 2018. We were hosting our respective parents as our daughter graduated from preschool earlier that day. It was late in the evening, meaning it was completely dark, and it was late since it was June, when Mr. Castellow chose not to knock on our front door to discuss any concerns that he might have, but instead took it upon himself to trespass on our property, walk up the side of our house on our deck, and approach and indeed startled my husband and my father-in-law at the back of our property. Mr. Castellow was visibly upset. He yelled at my husband that he kept stepping in animal excreta in the common space between our properties. Mr. Castellow shared that he walked his dog sometimes in the middle of the night and would step in excreta that he assumed was Gatsby's. Thereafter, in mid-July, Mr. Castellow again trespassed on our property, taking it upon himself again to walk up our side deck uninvited and angrily confronted Chris again about Gatsby at the back of our deck. These were the only 2 times that Mr. Castellow spoke to either of us before he apparently began recording Gatsby on his property. We were not aware that Gatsby was defecating on Mr. Castellow's property at that time, only that the common space was perhaps an issue. It was not until August 5th, 2018, that we were made aware that Gatsby was in fact defecating on the Castellow property. As you know, this is the date that corresponds with the first citation. Despite Mr. Castellow never having a conversation with me personally about Gatsby or otherwise, he approached me in my driveway, again without invitation, to enter our property, and he was nothing short of seething. I stood at the back of my vehicle with my 5-year-old daughter while he spewed expletive after expletive. I repeatedly told him that I was happy to have a rational conversation with him, but he screamed at me that the situation was beyond rational. I told him that he had never had a conversation with me, and that I was happy to discuss what was ever making him so angry and reach resolution, but that I would not do it while he was screaming at me and cursing in front of my child. With that, he did in fact return the feces to me, as he stated in his statement and his narrative, by throwing the bare feces at my feet. With that, he screamed at me to stay off his property, and I calmly asked him for the same respect. Unfortunately, until this day, we were unaware that Gatsby was defecating within his property lines and had no knowledge that any excreta had to be removed. We simply had no knowledge until the offending excreta was literally thrown at my feet. After taking my daughter to her sports lesson and attending church, I called Mrs. Castellow to discuss the morning's altercation. She was aware of it, apologized for her husband's behavior, and blamed his rant on the fact that he is a diabetic. I told her we all deal with health issues, and that in my view it wasn't a proper excuse. I also shared with her that to this point we were under the impression that the issue was in the common space, which of course is open to all kinds of animals. Mrs. Castellow agreed that the common space had been an issue for Mr. Castellow, but recently Gatsby had begun migrating to their yard. I apologized at this point, and Mr. Castellow and I pledged to work together to address the issue, including allowing me access to their property in order to properly train Gatsby, so that he understood that he was no longer welcome. I told her I would not be dealing with her husband at all after the assaultive treatment that I experienced that morning in front of my child, no less. Thereafter, I ordered a dog training collar on August 8th, a mere 3 days after Mr. Castellow's clash with me. It arrived over that weekend. The collar has a strong vibrating function with a sound alert. I contacted Mrs. Castellow, informing her that I ordered and received the training collar, and asked her when a good time would be for me to train Gatsby. She told me the best time was on Tuesdays when Mr. Castellow was at work and she was at home. We made tentative plans to train Gatsby on Tuesday, August 14th. On that morning, Mrs. Castellow called me and we arranged a specific time. At that time, I trained Gatsby using the vibrating collar and sound function up and down our driveway, indicating that the side that we share with the Castellows was off limits. Mrs. Castellow and I also walked Gatsby around the perimeter of the Castellow property a number of times and through the common space. At each point, I used the collar to train Gatsby in regards to the boundaries. I also asked Mrs. Castellow that she not feed Gatsby treats anymore because he would continue to show up at their balcony. I also told her that we would continue to work with Gatsby, but that it would take time, so I asked for her patience. She agreed. Finally, I asked Mrs. Castellow to call me if and when Gatsby was in their yard and or defecated on their property, while we would continue training him, and I would pick up any excreta as soon as possible with her permission to enter her yard. She agreed to that as well. I also asked her for any suggestions that she might have. She suggested that we walk Gatsby in the morning to ensure that he defecated elsewhere. We took her advice, and before leaving for work every morning, one of us walks Gatsby's in the woods behind our property, which is completely opposite the Castellow property. To date, this appears to have helped tremendously, and we appreciate her suggestion. We continue to work with Gatsby using the training collar from our property, the common space, and the public space around the Castellow property. Gatsby's behavior continued to improve in terms of his respect for his boundaries. If he breached a boundary, he would be called immediately back and would obey. There have been only 3 instances between the August 5th, 2018 incident and the present when Mr. Castellow has spoken with us. The first was at a neighborhood event in September of 2018 when Mrs. Castellow introduced her husband to me, presumably as a means to mend fences. The second was a phone call made by Mr. Castellow to my cell phone in late September, telling me that I was doing a much better job, but that Gatsby was in his yard. I advised Mr. Castellow that I was staring at Gatsby, who was 3 feet away from me. Interestingly, there was no complaint submitted to animal control for around this time. The last incident was on October 22nd, 2018, because Gatsby was on the Castellow property where it meets the common space between our properties, as reflected in the photograph submitted by Mr. Castellow on this date. Mr. Castellow screamed to my husband from his deck, and again, he submitted an affidavit of complaint for this incident, but rightly, no citation was issued for running at large, since Mr. Castellow admitted himself in his supporting narrative that my husband was clearly present and Gatsby was not without supervision. One of my colleagues was present for this exchange, and his supporting statement is appended to my narrative. While Gatsby's behavior was significantly improving, we were still concerned about his being on the Castellow property, particularly after the October 22nd incident. Thus, on November 1st, 2018, we ordered boundary flags, similar to those that were used by the trainer for the electric fence at our prior residence. On November 10th, we were hosting a house full of people for our daughter's birthday. Gatsby is unaccustomed to that much noise, so he spent much of the afternoon outside in our yard and apparently found his way to the Castellow property, which is referenced in citation number 2. It may have appeared to Mr. Castellow that he was running at large, but in reality, there were constantly people outside, including my husband. By mid-November, we had installed the boundary flags on our property that borders that of the Castellows. This means up and down the entire length of the driveway, around the side of our yard where our property bleeds into the common space that borders the Castellows' yards, and into the common space at the back of our property so that Gatsby is aware of his safe zone. Fortunately, it appears that Gatsby's muscle memories kicked in terms of the flags and what they mean, because we are aware of only one infraction since the time that the flags were installed, where Gatsby crossed the line and he was immediately called back. The success of this method is further evidenced by the fact that we have not heard from the Castellows if there have been no further trespassing incidences by Mr. Castellow, and as we have not been made aware of any further complaints made by Mr. Castellow. Again, we truly appreciate the opportunity afforded us here so that we can get our side of the story on the record. We will certainly abide by the decisions made by the Commission regarding the issued citations, but we wanted to ensure you were aware that Gatsby was in fact invited into the Castellow property time and again until it became an inconvenience to Mr. Castellow. We said it would take time to correct the behavior, and it has. However, we believe that it has been sufficiently mitigated at this point. A few mere months to steer Gatsby's behavior in a different direction after a much longer time than that being spent as an invitee is not unreasonable. Unfortunately, it was taken to an unreasonable place. In his statement, Mr. Castellow said he would probably have little interaction with us at all, which is telling. We prefer to have civil and cordial relationships with our neighbors and those that we share corners of this earth with, but this, of course, is Mr. Castellow's prerogative. Fortunately, we have encountered no such issues with other neighbors and look forward to continuing those positive relationships. At the end of the day, we love Gatsby. He's simply a member of the family, and we are trying to give him some controlled freedom to be a dog. He has a link collar from the American Kennel Club, which alerts us via cell phone app if he is more than 150 feet from his home base. Unfortunately, this zone, which I verified with the manufacturer cannot be adjusted, encompasses the Castellow property. Gatsby is not rambunctious. He's on the older side of a dog. He just wants to be outside on nice days when we're home. He is certainly not dangerous, nor has he ever given us a reason to think that he is. In fact, to the contrary, when randomly attacked by a dog passing on a trail at a public dog park, he didn't even fight back despite a bite to his ear. He simply wants to be around other dogs and most likely was always trying to socialize with Bella, the Castellow's dog. The fact that he was given treats simply concreted the idea that he was welcome there. In closing, we will keep the boundary flags installed on the portion of our property that borders the Castellow's property. That seems to have alleviated the issues, and we trust it will continue to do so. If there comes a time when these actions are no longer an amenable solution, we'll obviously consider other alternatives. Thank you again for your time and attention. And in terms of asking for relief, clearly under the Arundel County Codes, the removal of anima excreta, which is at 12-4-909, there has to be an indicia of knowledge, I would think, that there is actually excreta to be picked up. I did not have any indicia of knowledge until the excreta was thrown at my feet. The more appropriate charge for that, I think, would have been running at large, but that is not what Mr. Castellow claimed, and it is not obviously what we were charged with, so I ask that that certainly be dismissed. The running at large, you are correct that pictures are worth 1,000 words. In many of those pictures, you cannot see the dog's face, but I will not dispute the fact that that most likely is Gatsby because it does border the common space. But like I said, I believe that we have sufficiently mitigated that issue and that it will not be happening any longer. Thank you for your time and attention. I appreciate it.
Okay.
Thank you.
I had 3 questions, but you answered one of them. You confirmed that that was your dog in those 10 pictures.
I have no evidence that it's not.
Okay, well, and a couple of those, the dog's pooping.
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
it's hard to see. You can't see his face. You know, the pictures where you can see his face, that's absolutely my dog. But note
Okay.
that those are in the front yard. The reason that I'm not disputing that that's our dog in the backyard is because it is at that border, which Mr. Castellow referenced with the wood pile. that borders the common space, and that appears where Gatsby is, where he can't distinguish where that line is. It's not like a bright red line.
Right. My second question is, the training collar that you got?
Yes, sir.
When you use the training collar, is the dog on a leash?
He is not.
Okay.
I am with him. He went through extensive training to be off the lead.
Okay. And you indicated, between your properties, there is the common space, and you put up the boundary flags between the common space and their property. Do you realize that when your dog leaves your property and goes onto that common space without a leash, it's at large, every time? You made a huge mistake. Those boundary flags should be on your property line.
They are my property line,
You
sir.
said
I'm
they
sorry.
were-
No, they border I can actually tell you what page it's on. They actually border our property where our property borders the common space. Around the side of our yard, I'm sorry, it's a page 12 in the first complete paragraph. This means down the length of our driveway, around the side of our yard where our property bleeds into the common space that borders the Castellow's yard. So the flags are on our property
And it's in their entirety.
in their entirety. Yes, sir.
Well, once again, the flags aren't doing anything.
No, the flags are keeping him in. They're not hooked up to an
You've already
electric.
said, in one thing, that there's at least one time that you know that he went past the flags.
There
So
was-
to your point that these magical flags are keeping him in, sorry, I can't go there. I mean, if at least one time he's gone by, then he knows he can get by without being zapped. So, regardless where the flags are, like he said, as soon as your dog is off of that property in the common area, it is at large. Regardless whether your husband's on the porch looking at your dog, the dog is at large. Without a leash in that situation, your dog is at large.
Okay.
So that's the first thing in my mind.
Well, it also sounded like you were okay with your dog pooping in the common area because it didn't inconvenience them, and that's wrong too.
Oh, well, we do pick that up. I don't want you to think that it's not. In fact, I was out there picking it up yesterday in the common space. The funniest part is, the part of the regulation, sorry. The part of the regulation shall remove excreta deposited by an animal owned by that person on public walks, which this is not, recreational areas, which it is not, or private property other than the owners. This isn't any property that's owned by Mr. Castellow or anybody. It's the association's property, and we do remove it.
Okay, those pictures I submitted are all on our property. They're not common area or anything. That is our property.
And just because my point, the other point is, just because he doesn't own it or I don't own it, somebody does own the property. The association owns the property, so that doesn't absolve that situation.
Understood. I was out there yesterday picking up excreta. I will be honest with you. I take him out at 5 in the morning. I am not picking up excreta in the middle of the woods in the dark at 5 in the morning. But I do go out and pick it up later. I notice where it is, we mark, and we go out.
But when you take your dog out at 5 in the morning, is the dog on a leash?
No, he's not. He's under my control, however.
He's at large.
He's had weeks of training.
He's at large?
He's at large whenever he's, I'm
Yeah.
sorry. I'm sorry.
If he's off your property and not on a leash, he is at large. I don't care if there's 25 people around him.
Okay.
Because he's under your control is meaningless. He needs to be on a leash.
In our backyard?
Off his
Mr.
property.
Laird?
Off your property. What I said. He was just saying in the common area, she doesn't pick up the excreta because it's dark and goes back later. But she also said he's not on a leash. So the dog is running at large.
We can't walk our dog in the backyard without a leash?
Once again, in
If
your
it's-
backyard, yes. Once you cross into the common area, no. That's considered at large at that point. Once you leave your property and the dog is not on a leash, the dog is technically at large. Whether you can tell that dog to stop, sit, jump, dance, whatever it is that you have that dog trained to do off a leash, it's still at large once it leaves your property.
May I ask a regulatory
Without-
construction question? For the section of 12-4-905 in A, where it talks about that the section does not apply while undergoing training to heel on or off of a leash, that only applies when the dog is undergoing training, not while the dog has been fully trained and certified to be able to be off of the lead?
Correct.
Okay.
The dog needs to be on a leash if it's off your property, regardless.
Okay.
Of age, training,
I just wanted to make sure that I understood the language of the regulation.
anything further before we deliberate?
Anybody have anything?
Ma'am, you had said you didn't want to say something earlier. Do you want to say something now?
As far as the dog not being off the property, this has been in the past month. I happened to hear my dog barking in the house, so I went out the deck to see what was going on. There were cars slowing down on Shirley Lane. There was also people walking their dog, and there's Gadsby in the middle of the road. Now, Gadsby is not, he's not aggressive, but I said, Gadsby, go home. And Chris yells, he's here. And it's like, I told him, how can he be here when I've got my eyes on him? He's right there, he's out of the yard. So if he is doing excrement, which we have proof of, and you continually ask people to please either clean it up or, why even have them come in our yard to defecate anyway, and they don't do it. It's like, okay, Chris, the dog's down the street. Well, I'll just spank his little fanny. And then goes on and nothing happens. The reason why Miss Friends had never heard about it was because when my husband was confronting Chris, he figured maybe Chris would have mentioned something to Kelly, and it would have been absolved. It wasn't. Until finally, Michael took it upon himself. He was mad enough. He went and talked to Kelly. That's when she says, "Oh, I wasn't aware of this." So there's lack of communication between Chris and Kelly, and it just, one thing led to another, and it finally just hit a boiling point.
Her words that day were, have you spoken to my husband? And I said, yes, I have spoken to your husband so many times, it's not doing any good.
Objection.
Well, look, we don't need to get into character here, okay?
Yeah,
We're here to
seriously.
discuss the dog
Yeah,
at this
right.
point, okay? You guys can deal with that on other time, but right now, we need, looking at this, I'm ready to deliberate here. I mean, I don't see any evidence otherwise. I mean, it seems to me there's pretty clear-cut evidence in both cases. I mean, that's what I'm seeing.
Yep.
I don't know if anyone else has anything to say, but I mean, there's the defendants are admitting the dog is at large
Right.
repeatedly.
Do you have anything else before we deliberate?
Okay.
You?
No, sir.
Okay.
Thank you for your
I
time.
mean, yes, so, I mean, there's been, everyone's admitting that the dog's been at large, so I don't think there's any question there. And, I see pretty conclusive evidence that the dog is defecating in the complainant's backyard.
Right.
So I'd move to uphold both citations at this point.
I second it.
All in favor? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Salver, are you abstaining or no?
I'm abstaining.
Okay, you guys need this.